Welcome to the podcast, Paula. It is so good to have this chance to talk with you.
Oh, I'm so excited to be chatting to you today, Lesley. Thanks so much for having me.
So I'm going to ask you the same question I ask all my guests. What is your money story?
Well, that is a real big question, isn't it? And, as I was thinking about coming on with you today, I was thinking, goodness me, what is it? What is my money story? Because I've actually, prior to meeting you, which was luckily for me a good few years ago now, I didn't really ever think about my money story. I mean, I had little stories that I told myself in my head, but that I never really put any meaning to them, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
So I think I probably need to go back to when I was a little girl with my bunches, very cute, not anymore.
Oh, you are still cute.
Oh, thanks. I'll
Just
take
no bunches.
that. I'll take that. As to the sorts of things that went on in the house, I guess, and it's not things that were necessarily said to me, but it's things that I've realized about my childhood as I got older, and one, how lucky I was in one sense, but two, how sort of humble and lean I would say my upbringing was in terms of money, I suppose is the right way to say it. And, my parents split when I was 6, so there was all sorts of different hardships with splitting household and all of that they went through. And as a consequence, our family, as kids, we were brought up then with a sort of wider family with my cousins, so from 2 to 5, and 5 from 6 till about 18, I suppose. So making the housekeeping, as they called it back then, my auntie making all that split to feed the family of 5. And, I didn't realize what impact that had on me until I was older. That sort of, I suppose, if you like, that scarcity of money, and that, if you work hard, it was almost, you could just about make ends meet back in the day. Mm-hmm. I remember over the years asking for things like, friends were having piano lessons or whatever, and I'd want to do the same, and not being quite young and not really understanding. And, having the sort of, well, we're not a pot of money you can come to every time you want something. And the classic, money doesn't grow on trees, and that's kind of where I've come from. And I can see your face, Lesley, because if I think about it, that's probably why I get so concerned about money as an older woman. Thinking about all that foundation of how that's worked I don't want to say against me, because in a way it's been helpful, because I've tried to be frugal and careful with money. And that doesn't mean that I haven't learned nowadays how to have a good time either. But it has made me think about how I talk to my daughter. Now, she's 15 going on 25. You know what it's like these days with teenagers.
Absolutely. I have 2 of them. One in particular is 16 going on 36, I think.
Yeah, something like that. Absolutely. And they're just, she's just got this amazing sort of, I'd say she's showing traits of leadership already in even at her age. And I say that in terms of the way she conducts herself, but also her work ethic, because she's had a job now for a while, started as a volunteer role, and now she's able to do a few hours a week to sort of, earn her own pennies, if you like, and do her own thing. And you know, it's lovely to see that she understands that not all that money can come from me all the time, that she's got to make her own way. And, you know, but I hope that it doesn't go to the extreme, because sometimes she's like, I can't wait to get a job and really earn my own money, you know, which is lovely in terms of that ambition and desire to make something for herself. But at the same time, you know, I don't want her to rush, you know, don't want her to be rushing through her childhood and not enjoying that at the same time. So I think, you know, she's finding that balance that's right for her, which is really lovely. But I love that as my life has evolved and I think about opportunities for earning money, I guess, as I sort of grew up. And for me, it was very much that traditional approach, you know, that you would go to college and then you'd get a job, or you'd go to university and then get a job. And, you know, that was kind of the progression.
Yeah.
Now I'm happy to say that I'm able to show my daughter that I've got my own business now. And yes, I have some contract work as well as alongside that. But she understands that actually there's a whole different world out there. You don't have to go to university if you don't want to, or you can do it later in life like I did. You know, that there are so many other opportunities to make your money and create your own story around that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I suppose what I'm saying, Lesley, is that although I've had this sort of humble, traditional kind of lean background, I've tried not to let that influence my daughter too much in the way that she wants to create her own story.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, you know, today, in today's society, you know, we are far more aware than probably our parents were of our behaviours, the result, how that results in our children's behaviour or their set of beliefs, etc. I just want to go back to what you said about, you know, money doesn't grow on trees, and why I smiled about that one.
Yes.
And the reason I smiled is I have a different view of money doesn't grow on trees. And I think that is reflective of my upbringing to a certain extent, because when I was doing my mindset training, accreditation, the whole thing of money doesn't grow on trees came up. And I said, yeah, but money doesn't grow on trees. So why is that such a wrong thing to say? And it goes to show that actually it isn't certain phrases. It's the meaning we attach to those phrases. Because in our household, my boys both have got Xboxes, and the controllers on their Xboxes, before they changed them to ones that plugged into their Xboxes, they had to have AA batteries. And I think there were 4 AA batteries per controller. So you can imagine how many batteries they were going through. And we have a battery drawer in the house. And they would just go to the drawer and get batteries upon battery upon battery. And I used to say to them, guys, there isn't a battery tree at the bottom of the garden. Where do you think these batteries come from? Because Mum goes to Amazon and orders those batteries. So actually, I don't think personally there's anything wrong with saying money doesn't grow on trees, because I think until we start talking to our children about money, and we tend to do that around about 5 or 6 possibly, you know, when they're in a sweet shop and wanting to have that and that and that and that, we don't actually start talking to them in terms of, I can't just go to the printer and print off more money. Money does have to come from somewhere. Now, talking about earning money in terms of it being hard, absolutely, that is a mindset that I don't necessarily think is helpful. But I personally don't think there's anything wrong with talking about money doesn't grow on trees, because I think children can grow up believing, unless parents establish with them a sense of the value of money, and that's what that phrase, I think, is meant to invoke, is a feeling of value. But until we evoke that sense of value and that sense of, I can't go to that tree and pluck off as much money as you might want me to pluck off, then children are not going to have that understanding. So that's why I smiled, because I thought, you're thinking I'm thinking one thing, but I wasn't, because it is the meaning we attach, to those things very, very much. And as far as your beliefs around money and thinking about how you are parenting your daughter, what do you think you are doing intentionally different to maybe what you experienced when you were growing up as a child?
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to that, that meaning that you're attaching to things, doesn't it? Because it was a phrase that that I didn't necessarily like hearing, whether it's the money doesn't grow on trees or it's not an endless pot, whichever one you want to pick. And I think, intentionally, I've tried not to say anything like that to my daughter, and rather instill a good sort of, well, certainly now she's older, instill that good work ethic, wanting to earn the money for herself so that she can choose what she wants to do with it, whether she wants to save up for something. And she's saved up for a good few things and bought some really nice things for herself that she couldn't otherwise have had. So intentionally choosing to avoid those sort of, well, as you say, things that she can attach meaning to that might later impact negatively without you ever wanting it to. And I'm sure my parents certainly didn't want that to be the case. I think they were just trying to instill the same thing, actually, in that, the money does have to come from somewhere, as you say, Lesley, and in this case, you've got to earn the money by working. And then, then you're able to pay all the bills first, and then you've got the extra for any little extras that you can have on top of that, including your Xbox batteries.
Exactly, absolutely. And I think as well, it's about instilling that sense of a value, but also sense of self-worth. Because I think when our children are able to develop a sense of pride that they have been able to make a plan with regards to what they want to purchase, or create a budget that allows them to have the ability to have more things, actually we are creating that sense of independence and getting them used to the fact that they can't just expect their parents, even if the parents can provide it. I don't actually think that is the reason why children should be given everything, because what you're doing is you're instilling a money story that is your money story. I can afford to give my child whatever they want without them having to work for it. What if their situation as an adult is very different? What if they choose to go into a more vocational job that may not be as well paid as your job was? You're developing a mindset for them that actually is not going to support them, because they are going to have the money story that you gave them, which was, you can have whatever you want because I can afford to give it to you, rather than instilling that sense of valuing what money can do and valuing how you can influence its role in your life. So I think when we talk about money stories, it isn't necessarily a money story based on scarcity or lack. It could be a money story completely the opposite, that actually is not your money story as an adult. And that is when your sense of, I can't do this, I've never done it before, I don't know how to have what I want, how to create it, because my parents just gave it to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is about exploring how you can help your child to value themselves and what it is they can do to influence the life that they want to have. And having a Saturday job or holiday job, I believe, goes hand in hand in creating that sense of self-worth, self-reliance and independence. And it sounds to me as though that's exactly what you're doing with your daughter.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And, you know, almost to the point where she, you know, we've had the discussion of you never want to have to rely on somebody else. You know, you want to be able to look after you. You know, and she's very, very savvy, bless her. She is definitely going on 36, as you said. Very wise head on such young shoulders. But, you know, I really do see that for her and try to instill that for her. And it's interesting when I see, you know, friends and how their sort of parents are managing things around them, and the differences that you see between the children and how they're behaving now at sort of 15, 16, you know, in comparison to how you see your own child. So, you know, I've been noticing quite a bit of that recently. But it's super interesting one for me. And that piece around values as well is so important. And we have that discussion about what's important to her. She knows what my core values are of trust and tenacity and courage. You know, I've shared all of that with her in terms of what that means for me and, you know, what that means for my relationship with her and with my husband and with other people that I'm friends with, or the clients that I have and so on. And she's building that picture now for herself of what her own values are, A, around money, but B, around all of, well, life. You know, what does she value in life and what does that look like for her? So I feel like it's really exciting time because she's now in her GCSE year. And what does that mean that's next? She's talking about the potential of an apprenticeship because she can earn while she's studying. Yeah, of course, there we are already.
Excellent.
You know, so it's thinking about then what comes after that, or is she, you know, it's possibly hairdressing. If it's that, is she starting to build a client base alongside that so that she then gets into her own business straight away after the apprenticeship? Or, you know, the world is her oyster, Lesley, actually, which is lovely.
Absolutely.
You know, she gets that choice.
Yeah, which is fantastic. You mentioned that you took the, you know, traditional route, which was, you know, the same as me, because that was how I was brought up. You know, go to school, work hard, get your A levels, go to university, get a job. And I certainly never harbored any ambition whatsoever to run my own business until I was a parent and realized that the corporate job, you know, a couple of 100 miles away, was just not going to work, basically, with having two small children. I wish I'd read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, you know, a lot sooner, which talks about exactly as you have those choices that are now available, that children don't have to follow the traditional route, that there are other options, you know, apprentices, going to work, going off traveling and then going, whatever it, you know, it might be. Yeah. Do you wish you had followed a different route and started your own business sooner?
It's a really good question, because I'm a strong believer that, you know, and I don't want this to sound cheesy and cliche, but the experiences that we have make us who we are today. So had I not gone through my almost 30 years in corporate, got the experience I have today, become a leadership coach, you know, and then decided I was going to have my own business to go alongside that and so on, I might not have got to where I am today. It would be somewhere different.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what that would look like, I don't know. Do I wish I had it earlier? It would be interesting to know what it could have looked like, but I'm not sure I would change where I am, because I don't know if I'd have been ready earlier. There is a small part of me that's very curious, I would say, as to, okay, if I knew this at 18, I wouldn't have had the experience to be a leadership coach at that age, but there may have been something I could have done at, you know, in my own business at that stage, and maybe it would have evolved later into coaching. Who knows? I like to think it would have, because that's a real intrinsic part of who I am, and has been going on for some, I don't know, when was it, 2012 or something, that I first started getting interested and wanting to do it and say dabbling in coaching. So I think it's, yeah, there is a curious part of me that would love to know what would have happened had I taken that different path.
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, I went and presented at a network meeting last week, and the network meeting happened to be being hosted in a large solicitor firm's office in Bristol. And it was the first time I had been back in a properly corporate environment since I left about 12 years ago.
Okay.
Oh, and it was fantastic being back in that kind of, you know, the glossy building, the lovely toilets, the beautiful restaurant, etc., etc. And I'd kind of forgotten totally about that side of being, you know, in corporate life. And it did make me hanker for it a little bit. But at the same time, you know, I'm like you. I don't think I would have been as an effective entrepreneur, business owner, etc., coach if I hadn't have had that corporate experience. Partly because, you know, one of the huge benefits of being in corporate is the amount they invest in your own development, personal development, etc. But also to have those, you know, to have those opportunities to have to work out how to get the most out of the team, how to work effectively with other people, how to manage dispute, etc., etc. Yes. So whilst, like you, I'm curious as to, my husband started his business earlier than I did. So I'm curious as to how that might show up differently if I had done things differently. But there's no regret for how things have shaken out, because there's no point in having that regret. Yeah. With regards to what you do now and, you know, being a leadership coach, what do you think are the skills required of a great leader?
Oh, that's a really good question, Lesley, and one that I like digging into. So thank you for that. I think, you know, these days it really is about inclusivity and really flexibility. And I'm coming at this from a coaching headspace, really, but actually it really does double up in the leadership space. So that inclusivity and flexibility, meeting people where they're at, in terms of your team members. You know, if we think of traditional leadership, leading a team, so meeting your team members where they're at to get the best from them, being able to understand, taking time, in fact, to understand the strengths in your team, and and how you work best together. If we think about that whole aspect of high performing teams and, you know, helping look at the sort of gap analysis, if you like, and bringing in those additional bits so that you then all work together as this sort of well-oiled machine, if you like, to get to the end purpose and achieve the goals that you all want together. There's something beautiful about being able to lead that that purpose forward and have everybody buying in and working towards the same thing, where you're all, I suppose, to coin a phrase of a friend of mine, in your zone of genius, all delivering towards the end goal. But also that flexibility in terms of, you know, being able to manage and cope with the challenges that come our way. You know, life isn't quite so simple anymore these days. There's a lot of complexity. You know, just a small part of that is in the technology space. You know, we're no longer just dealing with chats within the team. We've got stuff going out on social media, communications across the whole organization, internally and externally. You know, there's so many complexities, different pulls on our time, being able to prioritize and all of that. So obviously organization skills and things come into it as well. But really, that inclusivity is probably one of the top things for me, meeting people where they're at and being able to help them show up as their best. And I think, you know, in terms of that leadership coaching piece, people want to have time to think. You know, going back to the complexity piece, there's so much noise going on, so much demand for our time as leaders, that you rarely take that moment to reflect on a meeting that just happened. How do I feel about conversations that happened there and the conclusions that we came to? Do I need to revisit that? Or, you know, you're so busy and rushing on to the next thing that none of that reflection takes place. Also, you know, I've just had this big project dumped in my lap. When am I going to get thinking time as to setting up how we get that started, who I want involved, you know, what who's on the board to approve it, you know, all of those things that come with a big project. You know, we're just not given the time to think. We're just expected to hit the ground running all the time. And yes, there is some skill in being able to do that, but there's also, I would argue, a much greater skill in making sure you give yourself time to reflect, think and evaluate before you jump in feet first. So that's kind of the traditional side of leadership. There's the less traditional side of leadership that I think a lot of people struggle with outside of the corporate space, which is leaders in our own business. Yeah. Leading ourselves in life. My goodness me, life is complex. You know, we've talked today about being parents. You know, we've got that going on. We've got business going on. You know, I've got additional contracts going on. You know, how do we make time to manage all of those things in our day-to-day? So yeah, flexibility, inclusivity, organization, you know, and consideration and respect of others. And I guess I'd bring in my my core values here, Lesley, again, in that, you know, my top three values for myself that I hold myself account to, but also that I seek in others, is that trust, that tenacity and that courage to go for things.
That's really interesting, because very often we can compartmentalize or put into discrete boxes working in corporate, being a leader in corporate or in a big business, and being, you know, a leader in your own business. And something that I wrote down there was, you know, we, you know, as entrepreneurs, as business owners, we're encouraged to work on our business as much as we work in our business.
Yes.
And we seem to think of that as being the domain, you know, of the small business owner, of the SME, but not the domain of the larger business, when absolutely it is. You know, as you said there, having time to think, to be strategic, not just to be reacting because that big project's been dumped in your lap. But equally, money mindset is very often thought of as not being in the domain of a corporate or of a salaried person, when actually, because your money mindset is so tied up with your sense of self-esteem, self-worth, self-value, if as a leader you are not managing those things, then that is going to affect your staff, your team, as much as it will if you are running your own business as well. So how does an effective leader address ensuring that their team is feeling valued, that their self-worth is where it needs to be in order for that team member to show up as effectively as they can, and not allowing their limiting beliefs to be manifesting them in their working day?
Yeah. And, you know, it's all about this term that you may have heard previously around psychological safety. As a leader, you have what's the word? Can't think of the word, but you should be creating psychological safety for your team. If you don't, it makes it very hard for them to show up and feel safe to be themselves. And what I'd mean by that is, if I let me give you an example. I like to run my team meetings very openly, so that everybody feels they can have a say, share what they think. And because in my mind, 10 heads are better than my one, if we're looking for a solution for something, for example. So I've naturally created a space where they feel safe to do that. There would never be a time, no matter how random or off the wall their suggestion was, that I would make them feel small and stupid for saying it in a meeting. That would be totally alien to me. So it's being able to hold that safe space for your team to allow them to show up and blossom at their best in that moment. And don't forget, if you've done that great work on making sure you've looked at the strengths of the team, you've worked on the values and the collective purpose and goals of the team, then you're welcoming and embracing and being inclusive about that diversity that you want in that team to make it high performing. So therefore, allowing them all to share their different lenses, as you were talking about different things, and enabling them to feel safe to do so, welcoming in those things. That doesn't mean every single thing everybody says is fab and that it's going to be taken on and as part of the solution, but it's, there are ways of that. That's a really great idea. Not sure that's going to work for what we're talking about here. Can we talk about it a bit more? And if not, can we park it for something else that's coming down the line? And I'm sure we'll be able to use it for that. So it's helping them feel valued in what they've shared. So there's the psychological safety piece, which is huge in helping to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to the very first question I asked you with regards to what is your money story, and you reflected back to where your money story started, which is the same for everybody largely, in their childhood. How far would you say that relationship has now changed in terms of where you are in your adult life?
Well, I would say that even as old as I am, Lesley, I probably had a breakthrough this time last year, with it that made me understand how significantly it's changed. And that was when I was looking for my next contract. Suddenly the money didn't matter anymore. Now, I'm not saying I don't need the money and, you know, that's not important, but it wasn't the driver. It suddenly was way down the list of priorities. What actually mattered was, what's the values of this organisation that I'm looking at working with? How do they show up? What opportunities are there for people? How are they looking after their team members? What's the purpose? What's the mission? That was all so much more important to me than the money. And the money, you know, was, yeah, way down the pecking order. And that was a real moment of clarity for me to say, actually, I'm okay with this. You know, I feel like I've really moved on. And not that I consciously prior to that thought, oh, I'm stuck in my childhood, you know, in scarcity mode or whatever. But that's honestly the conscious moment where I noticed that switch for me.
Yeah. And I think, you know, that very often is the case. We come to a realization, a little bit like, you know, being on a car journey and suddenly kind of reaching the turning on the motorway that you need to take, but not remembering the last 25 junctions because you've been in your head. And I think, you know, kind of going into that trance almost. And I think sometimes we get a realization thinking that it's happened in that moment when it hasn't. It's been lots of little changes along the way that we haven't necessarily taken much notice of, but all of a sudden something happens and it's like, oh, my thinking has changed about that. I've let go of that. I no longer feel quite as strongly about that. I can now forgive that person because that length of time has gone between the argument and something else. And I think sometimes just allowing these things to happen rather than in fixating on creating that change, sometimes just relaxing back and letting be what will be can be a really healthy approach to have. And that seems that's what's happened to you in terms of you deciding last year, what's the next right step for me to take?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it is always, and I call them ridiculously small steps, so ridiculously small, you can't possibly help but achieve these things along the way. So it is definitely a series of ridiculously small steps over the years for me. And another big part of that was connecting to my purpose, because that totally changed everything for me 3 years ago and really helped me have a completely different outlook on life, the way I make decisions, how I approach my work, how I approach my home life even. You know, you can't say, oh, I've just connected to my professional purpose. It doesn't work like that. You know, it permeates through everything we do. And, you know, leading from that purpose in everything that I do has really, really changed things for me.
And I think it does make it feel as though that part of the puzzle has clicked into place.
Yeah, that's a lovely way to describe it.
Yeah. So how can people connect with you, Paula?
Well, lots of different ways, Lesley. Thanks for asking. And one of those ways is, you know, as a leadership coach, I thought it was remiss not to start my own podcast so that I can reach lots more people and help them in their own leadership journeys and how they choose to show up as the leader that they want to be. And I do that through the Game of Leadership podcast, and it's the podcast for curious leaders. You can find that on all the usual channels, Apple, Spotify, etc. But I'm also very much, my home social media, if you like, is LinkedIn. So I'm known as Paula Eddy Wilcox on there. So would love to connect with anyone who's interested in just having a chat or learning more about leadership coaching or connecting with your purpose, anything like that. I am also on Facebook and Instagram under On Point Leadership, which is my company where I do the leadership coaching through. So that's how you can connect.
And we'll ensure that all those details are in the show notes so people can easily find the podcast and easily find you as well.
Oh,
thank you very, very much for coming on. I've loved our conversation. And even though we've known each other for a few years now, what I love about these guest episodes is you get a chance to drill in a little bit deeper and to know a little bit more. So thank you for coming on today and sharing your money story.
Oh, you're so welcome, Lesley. It's been an absolute pleasure. And you're absolutely right. You know, we chat about all sorts of things all the time, but we've never talked about this. So it's been really lovely to dig into it and have a recognise a couple of those moments that have changed things for me. So thank you for that opportunity.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Until next time, take care.
Bye.